Hey everyone, welcome to another live episode, live with Kilani and Marcel, or Marcel and Kilani, whichever way you want to do it. I always like Kilani and Marcel. Kilani's name is way cooler than mine. Yeah.
Well,
So
thank you and welcome everyone. I'm just gonna, if you see me reaching down here, my my cat keeps trying to play with some pieces of broken glass that I broke a glass a second ago, so I just have to make sure that she's not getting to it.
yeah, she's a playful kitten, isn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah. So and the moment there's something on the ground, she's like, "Ooh, that's mine." Yeah, yeah. So welcome everybody, and I'm actually just going to put on the chat box so that we can see if anybody is chatting with us. Today's episode is going to be about authenticity. And one of the reasons why I want to talk about authenticity today is for some reason it's just been coming up in a number of my in my coaching sessions, and I thought, you know what, it's actually a really interesting topic, and personally I believe that um, there's a lot that we understand about authenticity, but there are also some misconceptions about authenticity, particularly, of course, in leadership. And so I thought, might be fun today to have a chat about it, and see what we kind of come up with, and if you have any questions out there as well. Kilani, do you have anything to bring? Oh, I got my phone is talking to me. So do you have anything that you wanna open with in the topic of authenticity?
I have a question for you if you
Hmm.
wanna get started with a kind of question answer type situation.
Sure. Go
So
for it.
my question is, what does authenticity mean? What is what is the definition of that word in this context? Because I feel like it can mean so many different things across the board.
Yeah, that's a really good question. To me, and I've seen a number of definitions of authenticity from various you know leadership people and things like that. And for me, the my personal definition is to have the courage to show the world who you are over what you are. And what I mean with that is that there's still a lot of people, you're right, who hide behind things like their reputation and their job title and things like that, and have this sense of like, well, I can't really show who I am because it's because who I am is not enough, right? Who I am is like, that'll make a bad impression, right? And so we have this understanding somewhere along the line that showing who we are really should be around showing not really who we are, but kind of like a fake version of who we are, and right, because that is acceptable for society, right? And it's acceptable for the world. And I think that's where the challenges really begin, is that when we then start saying, I am not enough, right? I am not, I can't just, I'm the CEO of a company and I can't just be me because being me is not enough. People will not want to buy stock in my company if they really saw the real me, and I get where that comes from, but at the same time, though, when we start setting up a persona, right, that we think the world wants to see, then we have to question whether or not that is then true authenticity. And I think that's the fine line, right? That's that balance, because um, I guess an argument, right, that I hear from a lot of executives is, well, it's like, I can't be in a board meeting, for example, and throw a tantrum because there's something I hate to do, right? Which my normal me would probably want to do that because it's I hate doing it, right? And so I think there's an important distinction to be made with regards to kind of showing who we are, right? And what that actually means and what that really looks like versus what we are. Yeah. Do you possibly have any examples of where because you cater to a much younger population of professionals, people who are still kind of finding themselves in that kind of career pathway and things like that. Do you find yourself having conversations with some of your kind of fellow age mates, so to speak, with regards to authenticity?
I do, in a sense. I think it's slightly removed from the subject of authenticity. I think we're
Hmm.
lucky to be in a generation where we've kind of put an emphasis on the importance of authenticity and practicing it. And while that
Mm,
certainly doesn't mean that we don't experience problems with it or that we struggle to be authentic, I think that what it ends up manifesting itself as with my generation at least is it shows up with this need to typically do things or show up in a different way that then
mm,
kind of hides who we really are. So what I see a lot is, especially in high performers, is the
hmm,
need to have a million projects going on at once and the need to be the best at everything, and that their standard of satisfaction is being the best at everything in the world. And I think
hmm,
that while that's not necessarily hiding from authenticity, it does play into it. As it kind of it prevents you from just being okay with being yourself and being okay to present yourself as you are.
mm,
Feel this need to create this external persona
mm.
that is better.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. Something I hadn't considered is because I guess when you're young, right, you're stepping into that corporate space. There are a lot of things that you want to prove, right? There are a lot of things you want to accomplish, and there are a lot of things that you want to, kind of go after. And part of that process is that you might be selling yourself, or kind of spreading yourself thin, and then while you're kind of building this I would say portfolio of accomplishments, right? You also want a certain, I guess, reputation, right? Because building that reputation is I guess what's going to make you hireable, right? It's going to make you promotable. And so at a very young age, I think we might already be starting to kind of shape that and saying, this is I need to be authentic, but it has to be within certain parameters of authenticity to showcase me as somebody who is successful and accomplished, because nobody's going to want to hire a failure, right? Like, and it's a great thing to say, to ask too, is like, what recruiting manager is going to want to have a interview with you if you present yourself as, listen, I've failed at this, I've failed at that, and I've and by the way, I feel pretty miserable every single day, right? They're not going to want to hire somebody. We learn that so early on in life, that presenting ourselves a certain way, right, is going to land us that next role. And so in one way, on one side, we're talking about, hey, listen, we need this level of authenticity so we can build trust and all of this kind of stuff. But on the other side, corporations are hiring people who present themselves as something that they aren't 100%, that they aren't actually able to be 100, because they're not already, kind of, in that space of being permitted to do so. And that's actually really interesting, because then think, 20, 30 years forward, for an executive who spends their career presenting themselves a certain way, in which they think this is what my next, how I should be behaving to land my next role, and all of those kind of things. By the time that person's been practicing this reputation, for 20 odd years, that becomes such an embedded habit that they don't know any other way of operating, right? And then all of a sudden, this person then is of some form of senior leadership role, and here we come in and we say, well, yeah, but authentic leadership, is a very important part of building trust. And it was like, well, how do I do that? Because for the past 20 years, I've not really been allowed to be authentic. Right. And so understandably, then, we end up with these parameters. We say, well, yes, authenticity within a certain margin of acceptance. And then outside that margin of acceptance, I can't have a bad day. Right? Because if I have a bad day, it's going to cost money, it's going to cost employees, it's going to cost this, whatever the cost of. So I can't present myself that way, and I can't be honest with the world. Right. Yeah. So that's actually a really interesting perspective on what authenticity means. And I think that is the big struggle, right? That is the big challenge that a lot of people have, is that, then say, well, how do I then show up, right, as this authentic version of myself that the corporate world is going to be comfortable with? And what does that really look like? And so what we then end up with is so many of these kind of subjective definitions of authenticity. Yeah,
And
exactly.
I think that's a great point about that. After 20, 30 years of building on this persona that we created at a young age, that kind of becomes who we are, and it's hard to break out of that, at least in the work environment or the context of work. And I'm curious to know, and I don't know if there's an answer to this, but just what it would look like if we were all able to step into the workplace with our authentic selves. And I do think that it's important to mention that there's a distinction between showing up authentically and regulating yourself. Because as you mentioned, you may want to throw a tantrum in a meeting, but that may not be appropriate to do. And that is a very real thing happening. But at the same time, being able to show up as your authentic self while still displaying what's appropriate in the workplace. I feel in addition to the authenticity.
Yeah, and especially, with regards to that self-regulation, because that's a filter, right? And how thick is that filter that we're going to use in terms of regulating ourselves. And I think that's an important distinction, is that as human beings who live in society and live together and work together, there is a certain filter that we need to apply in order for us to be able to operate in society. Right? We learn that as children. We learn to use the words, thank you and please. And those words are used because they are socially, kind of social expectations, I guess, in a way that allows us to function in society. And the thicker that filter becomes, the more and more correct we then kind of think of ourselves as having to behave. And and I think what you're saying is that what if there were a company, and I'm sure there are, we don't get to talk to them probably, but I'm sure there are companies out there who say, listen, I just want you to be you, even if that means you're having a bad day. Because think of it this way, right? If we are that socially connected, like for example, families and people where we can actually be that honest with each other, right? That when I'm having a bad day, and even if I were to throw a tantrum and I was having a bad day, where that would be reciprocated with either being held accountable by others, right? Who say kind of, hey, Marcel, that's not appropriate. Right. And that people feel okay to say that, or where it's reciprocated by a hug. Right, where I might need an emotional hug, and of course these days with DEI and stuff like that, we don't want to necessarily inappropriately touch a person, but we can touch people emotionally, right, through kind of support, and are you okay, and kind of like, what can I do to support you and help you, and I think if there were from the ground up, if there were this level of tolerance, but also a level of accountability, right? And maybe also permission, right? Where it is okay to hold each other accountable for inappropriate behavior, right? That for example, when I'm a leader and I think it's okay to not use the word thank you and I'm sorry, for example, which by the way we see plenty in the business, right? In the corporate world, there's how many emails are out there that don't even address people by saying hello and hi and how are you, and I mean, there's just talk about basic social norms, right? A lot of these are forgotten because people deem themselves so busy, right? But if we were in a situation where, or in a corporate culture where it was okay to call each other out on that, I'm actually wondering if we really needed to put such a thick filter on ourselves. If the filter were socially regulated with a level of tolerance, empathy, compassion, right? But then also with accountability on the other end. Could we then just show up being who we are, like who we are, and find a way to operate and function as our true selves? Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, yeah. And I'd love to know if there are companies out there who do that, who challenge their people to say, you know what, be you, even in your worst form. It's okay. We'll let you know, but we're not going to hold it against you. We're not going to say we can't promote you because you're having a bad day, because it's expected that you're going to have a bad day once in a while, but also expect that we're going to hold you accountable together as a collective, as a group of people who live and work together. Yeah, because think about it, it's like the average human being, they spend like 10 hours a day at work, right? I mean, that's like 50% of your life, is spent at work. And of course if you can't be you, how can you then also give yourself permission to be happy? And we know, of course, by experience that degrees of happiness in employees is still steadily declining, pandemic or not. It's been declining for a long period of time. 80% of, still, right, over 80% of employees that are asked whether they have stress in their lives say yes. I mean, that's a tremendous high number, and there doesn't seem to be a very big outlet for them, right? And there doesn't seem to be an opportunity for them to stick up their hand and say, guys, I am stressed out to here. And so they have to then keep kind of like in this authentic box. And that is a really interesting talking point. Thank you for bringing that up, because it is, it's got me thinking, let's put it that way, right? Is that maybe that's a conversation for companies to have, is to say, why can't we be at our worst? Right? Because if you think about it from a yin and yang perspective, if we can't be at our worst, we also can't be at our best. If there's no tolerance for us to be at our worst, there's also no tolerance for us to be at our best.
Something that just kind of popped in my head too as you were talking, and I think that this is a really common thing that at least I've heard, and that I've heard you say a couple of times too, which is what reminded me, is that when we speak about our authentic selves or acting authentically, we tend to associate that with negative behavior in some way, with being at our worst, with not showing up fully. Whereas I'm wondering where we could see our authentic selves as being able to contribute or add something beyond what that persona that we've created could add to the situation.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is because of that filter, right, that we have, we also filter out some potential strengths.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because we have this belief that there's that certain way that we need to behave, and so we leave aspects of ourselves out of the door, right? That because we think it's inappropriate, for example, right? but that might actually be really valuable for the company or for the organization. And there might be great creativity and innovation and all of these things in there that we're also filtering out because there's this way of that we need to be behaving.
And
Right.
I'm wondering too if there's a way for us to maybe bring the two together, that it doesn't have to be a 0 or 100. Either you're
That's right.
that filter entirely or you're yourself. But to be able to bring the strengths of what you've learned through your life and what's helped you so far, but then also to be able to bring in the strengths from who you really are and what serves you. And that's something I've seen in my own experiences. I've always been a very creative person. I've always been very inclined towards creating, imagining, envisioning things. And yet my whole life I've been taught that the way to success is to be very methodical, very logical, very focused, and that's gotten me really far. But what I found is that when I'm able to, yes, be logical and methodical, but also give myself space to bring creativity into that and to then apply logic to my creative process or vice versa, that allows me to kind of see things from a whole different perspective and level.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it reminds me of, and I have this conversation so often, right? So as thinking animals, we have a tendency to trust what happens up here a lot more than what happens in our hearts and in our guts. And it's kind of the same thing, right? Is where when you work in a culture, right, in an organization or even in a corporation that relies so heavily on quantifying behavior and data, right? Is you create a culture of people who live in that headspace because they're only going to trust what they think they know, and you can't quantify a gut feeling, you can't quantify emotion, right? And so those things are often left at the door. And I see that so often in managers who are growing to become leaders. So something that I believe sets a great leader apart from somebody who might be kind of not so great as a leader is that great leaders are equally versatile. They know when to use their heads, their hearts, and their guts, and they use those three interchangeably, right? In a way with it, and it's kind of like what you're saying is they're more free. They're less restricted, right? In doing so, and they're willing to trust their guts, and they're willing to trust their hearts just as much as they're willing to trust their heads. And I see in a lot of managers who manage processes all day and manage people is they don't always have that level of trust in themselves, in that gut. And so they're so stuck in their heads, but it really is just 1/3 of their wisdom lives in their head. The other 2/3 lives in their head and their heart. And because they have this belief, right, and they've been conditioned that that's how they should be acting, they've just practiced putting those things aside and never touching them. And then all of a sudden it becomes like this foreign language, that they actually they forget how to tap into it. And even though inherently as human beings we know how to do it, but they unlearn that ability, and so in a very similar way, creativity and all of these kind of stuff might be living outside the filter that you're setting for yourself as you think what is, in your case, authentic behavior, right? And that might be a good thing to look at, right? Is to say, hey, is in my authenticity, am I really showcasing myself? Am I really, or am I just showcasing what I think the world wants to see as this authentic version of myself, right? Here another great example, right, is and I'm sure the viewers have all also kind of heard, and I don't know if you heard about the Finnish prime minister. She's like 35 years old. She's in Finland, right? And there was a video of her at a party, and she was dancing, and she was actually like actually not typical prime minister white person kind of dancing. She was letting it go, and she was having an awesome time. And there was so much criticism of her in the way she was dancing and having a good time, because then of course there was a lot of criticism about, hey, your neighboring country is at war, you have you have nothing to celebrate, and all of those kind of things. And that is again kind of this somebody who courageously, right, because it takes courage to be you, and kind of to say to the world, kind of like, hey, you know what, screw you. Right, I'm just going to be me. She's 35 years old. She's doing a great job, by the way, apparently, as a prime minister. And then on top of that, she showcases herself and doesn't really care, apparently, right? What people kind of say, the kind of box that she should be in. And I really respect that about her. I think that whatever you can say about that is that, to me, is authenticity, right? Is that she's not hurting anybody, she's not creating, is literally, she's just out there having a good time dancing. And I think that when we have such thick filters on, that we don't tolerate the fact that we can have a good time and still do good work, and all of those kind of things, something's wrong.
And
Yeah.
something else too is that some of the most successful people in the world have gotten to where they are because they've done out of the ordinary things, like the prime minister. I was listening to an interview with this billionaire. I forget his name, but he's the man he's been in a number of big startups. But the first one that he was a part of was creating, those airport kiosks where you can print your ticket out. He was one of the founders of that. Back in the 90s, I think they started. And his big tip for success is that he reads fiction books. He reads fairy tales. And he says all day I'm working, I'm thinking, I'm in that logic mode, and having that time to allow my brain to think in a different way allows me to make connections between different things, and it's actually propelled my growth as an entrepreneur. And what I think is really interesting about that is that we all have these drives to do these seemingly random things. Like you'll get a random urge to, pick up your guitar that you haven't played in years, or to go for a walk in the middle of the day. And yet we are taught to say, no, we're not going to do that. I'm a corporate employee. I'm an executive. I sit at my desk and I do my work. But yet what that's doing is it's taking away from your experience as a human. And I think, especially in leadership, allowing yourself to have that human experience is what then allows you to be able to lead, because that's where your learning comes from. That's where your intuition comes from, your idea.
Beautiful. Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
Kind of where all of it starts, right?
Yeah, exactly. And what's crazy, right, is that a lot of companies, at least, there are still dinosaur companies out there that have performance reviews, like these annual performance reviews, and there are tons of them, right? And as antiquated as that research is, they're still doing it because they're so stuck on their data. And in many of these companies, part of that performance review process is getting feedback from the manager. And honestly, there have been a number of situations where I've had employees say to me, you know what, Marcel, I can't do that because in my performance, I get a negative rating because my boss tells me that I'm not taking work seriously. So there is this, again, this feedback, right? There's this thing of like to take work seriously, we have to be serious all day long. You know what I mean? It's like apparently I can't take work seriously and have a good time. That's apparently that's not possible. Right? And why would we not have in a performance review, hey, I feel you're too serious. You're not having enough of a good time. That's worrying to me. That is not on a performance review. You don't see that. Is your employee having enough fun? Are they laughing enough? Right? Are they joking? Are they having, and if not, we have a problem. Right? Yeah. And so there's so clearly that conversation around authenticity is a debate that it's probably still going to go on for years and years and years, right? But you pose a good point. Is that if, and especially with your generation, right? As we have the Gen Zs now coming into the workforce, who are who already appreciate being a lot more authentic than maybe people kind of like from my generation, from these kind of the what is it, the Gen Xers and the baby boomers, right? Um, we've kind of resigned to the fact that we need to be kind of dusty old people, that all holes in our clothing from moths and all of that kind of stuff, and cobwebs, brushing the cobwebs off and stuff like that. And we seem to be okay with kind of looking that way and operating that way. But your generation is much more kind of eclectic, right? And authentic in that sense. And what are we going to do, right, to make sure that we don't destroy that? Because I think that's an important thing, is that if we can keep that level of authenticity as pure as possible, and that means really giving people permission to be human, right? And in their worst as well as in their best cases, right? Be at your worst. It's okay. As long as you're not at your worst for 6 months in a row, but be at your worst today, right? And that's and that's I think maybe one of the big takeaways for me in this conversation is, what can we do as leaders to encourage our people to be okay with being at their worst, so that they can also be okay with being at their best. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah,
Great
that's a
stuff.
great
Yeah.
connection. I think that's so important, is giving people space to be at their worst so that they can also have room to be at their best.
Exactly. And I have a comment here, so I want to kind of add that into. Yeah. So agree on Marin, right? She is being authentic and was elected by the Finnish public. Non-Finns comments should not be concerned. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree, because we actually don't know what people in Finland are saying about her, right? So, and in all case, let's face it. Finland is a country that I highly regard as one of the front runners in terms of leadership research, and it's actually really interesting. A fellow leadership coach, actually, that I know in Finland, who's written tons of books on leadership, and he was telling me once that all the men in Finland go through this mandatory military, you know, um, conscription, right? So they, kind of spend a year and a half. And what he was saying is that something that the Finnish government did early on, and is showing great benefits, is that every male, unfortunately, because only the men have to go through, but every male also undergoes, doesn't matter what their rank is, but they undergo leadership training in their military service. So you'll have 18, 19, 20-year-old young men who undergo this intensive leadership coaching and leadership training. So they're conditioned, right, to think more openly, and they're not afraid to challenge the status quo of things, just going into society. So when they're released into society, they already have these great leadership qualities and abilities. And now, kind of like a couple of decades later, that's really showing in Finnish society, because it's at least all of the men have gone through this. And I know that women tend to be better leaders than men do anyway. So it's really interesting how that is translated into a population of people that has become so much more open to allowing people to be human and to be themselves, and is willing to challenge things like education and all of these kind of things, and they have so much courage in that space. And yes, and I wholeheartedly agree, if you are not from Finland and you have some level of criticism about those people, you have a thing or two to learn from the Finnish people, I will tell you that. So, and I had the opportunity to be in Finland, and a couple of decades ago, unfortunately, in Helsinki, and I'm going to tell you, it is one of the most powerful countries in terms of a very strong population, a very intelligent population. They understand how to challenge the paradigms of leadership, and that's always a front runner and always a good country to look for a great example on many of these kind of things. So thanks. Thanks, Dr. Singh, for bringing that up. I wholeheartedly agree. Right.
And
Well, that's
if
Sorry.
I can add one thing to that really
Yeah.
quick, is what I think is cool about that comment is kind of perfect timing in our conversation, because I certainly agree with the comment, and I think we can even expand that further to people judging people for being themselves in general,
Yeah.
and that anyone outside of the person themselves, or maybe actually I'm just going to leave it there, outside of the person themselves, it's kind of like, let them be them and let you be you. And I think that giving other people the opportunity and space to be themselves allows you to also have the space to be yourself.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, and could you imagine if we just, and of course this is just theoretical and hypothetical, but could you imagine if we didn't learn, right, how to waste most of our time judging what other people do, and instead just spent that time working on ourselves, right, and being authentic selves, and gave people the space to just be themselves too, without any form of judgment. I mean, what would the world look like, right? What could society, and by the way, what could an organization look like if we were all operating in that space? Yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful thought. Something we should definitely add in our book. I think that's a great conversation for our book, for sure. Well, I think that should be about it for today's broadcast. I want to thank everybody so much for coming on. We also have Temsin, who joined the call for a short while, but she had to log off at 9 a.m. So Temsin, you are most welcome. Hope you can come on again sometime in the future. And of course, Dr. Singh, thank you for that comment. I wholeheartedly agree. So that's all good. And of course, Kilani, thank you as well. Always great insights, and it's wonderful to just have that multicultural perspective is always so powerful. So thanks for that. And then I think it's time to log off. Anything, Kilani, you want to finish with anything?
Nope, I think that's all for me. That was a great discussion.
Awesome. Great stuff. Right. Then I will, for everybody, look out for our next broadcast. Hopefully we can get on next week and have a great chat with you. So look out for the announcement, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everybody. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.